Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We're going to make a start now, so if we can settle in. Good morning to all the World Conference participants, and I'm sure you've all really been looking forward to this session. I know that I've been waiting and looking forward to this for months. It's really one of the most exciting plenary sessions of this World Conference. So I'll be co-chairing with my world-famous colleague, Professor Mike Daub, who's sitting here beside me. So we'll be interchanging and working together through this session. And we've got a real star-studded group, including the very famous and courageous Minister Riley from Ireland. So we'll have a great session. And the session's title, Globalization of Standardized Tobacco Packaging, Which Countries Are Next? This kind of follows up from Dr. Chan's opening comments in her keynote yesterday when she said that standardized and plain packaging the trains already left the station. Despite the despicable protestations of the tobacco industry. We're really at the cutting edge of global tobacco control with this session. This plenary will tell a story of progress for tobacco control and public health, including the mountains of new evidence demonstrating the effectiveness of plain packaging, standardized packaging. This has been a story which has been in the making for 2 decades now. As far back as the 1990s, the insidious tobacco industry established what was known as a plain packaging group, through which the tobacco companies conspired to resist plain packaging. And we all know when the tobacco companies band together on a common project, that really means trouble. And also in the mid-1990s in Canada, the Canada Standing Committee on Health had considered plain packaging, and the policy was in the conceptualization phase from that time forward. But it was only 10 years ago, last month, that the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control entered into force. Power began to shift from the hands of the self-interested, navel-gazing tobacco industry to those working in public health. Even as recently as 2005, however, it was only for the true believers in plain packaging that could see it ever becoming a reality. And it was only 3 years ago at the 15th World Conference on Tobacco Health in Singapore that the conversation centered around Australia. Australia is the first and only country at that time in the world to introduce plain packaging legislation. People wondered, will they be a catalyst for change? Or as the tobacco industry would have us believe, will Australia be an outlier? I'm pleased to report today that we did very well on the way towards achieving the resolution of the World Conference in Singapore. And 3 years ago, exactly 3 years ago to this day, the resolution aimed to have 20 countries to introduce plain packaging. And today, developments at the country level are moving at extraordinary pace. 2.5 weeks ago, Ireland passed plain packaging legislation. Last week, plain packaging legislation passed the UK House of Commons, and Singapore announced a public consultation on plain packaging. This week, the House of Lords passed plain packaging into law in the UK. Norway released a public consultation document proposing plain packaging, and we have learned also that plain packaging bills are under discussion in the Health Commission Parliament in Panama, and South Africa's efforts to pass plain packaging legislation this year were announced by the Minister of Health during this conference. This is to say nothing of the progress in other countries such as France, New Zealand, Burkina Faso, and Turkey, which are working at a steady pace to develop and implement plain packaging. We will hear success stories from some of these countries this morning. All this progress is being made despite the industry's best efforts to thwart it, such as through 3 legal claims lodged against Australia and threats of multiple legal claims against Ireland and the UK most recently. Given that the industry fights hardest against the most effective tobacco control measures, it must be very worried about what the globalization of plain packaging, standardized packaging could do. And it is very busy, the tobacco industry, concocting false evidence and lobbying hard against it. This is an important moment in the history of tobacco control. We are witnessing the creation of a global movement towards plain and standardized packaging. We will discuss the story here today. It is a story that by no means finished, but is one of progress and evolution. We will hear of the progress from the domestic perspective, from the Minister of Health, Minister for Youth and Children's Affairs from Ireland, followed by an update on the evidence available in Australia. Then we will hear country updates from the UK, New Zealand, and Norway. So much without further ado, I want to introduce the dynamic, courageous, fearless Minister for Children and Youth Affairs for Ireland. And also I made sure that I found some spots of green actually as well too. St. Patrick's Day was earlier this week, but still the spirit of St. Patrick's Day week. So Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Doug. I don't know who you were talking about there, but I'm very pleased to be here. Can I say, ladies and gentlemen, that it is truly an honour for me to address you here today as a minister, but I feel particularly privileged to do so as a doctor. Recently, as you know, Ireland became the second country in the world and the first in Europe to enact plain packaging legislation. This has been a long journey. We first considered this policy after it was introduced in Australia in December 2012. And I'd like to take the opportunity today to pay particular tribute to Australia. The road to passing the legislation had far more twists and turns than we ever anticipated, both in Ireland and in Europe. It was clear from the outset that there would be additional hurdles to passing legislation for plain packaging in Ireland due to our obligations to comply with European directives. At the time, a 2001 directive was in force which did not permit picture warnings on the front of the packet. A draft directive that would make plain packaging far more effective and legally sound was progressing slowly through the European bureaucracy. By a happy coincidence, Ireland held the presidency of the European Union at the beginning of 2013. With the support of other countries, we succeeded in passing a new directive through the Council of Ministers in just 6 months. This directive permitted warnings, including pictures, to occupy 65% of the front and the back of the packet, and explicitly permitted countries to introduce plain packaging. It was only when the directive made its way to the European Parliament that we saw the full power and influence of the tobacco industry at work. Leaked tobacco industry documents show that 161 lobbyists were hired and millions of euros were spent by one tobacco company alone. Members of the European Parliament complained that the scale of lobbying on this directive was unprecedented. Key parts of the directive were under serious threat. There was a very real danger that the European Parliament would vote in favour of reducing the size of warnings, and even that the directive itself wouldn't get through the European Parliament. In response, I and 15 other European health ministers co-signed a letter urging members of the European Parliament to progress the directive. At the same time, the Irish Prime Minister and I wrote to every member of the European Parliament in the largest grouping, urging them to keep large warnings on the packets and to progress the directive. Thankfully, the tobacco industry's lobbying was not successful in diluting picture warnings or the right of member states to introduce plain packaging. Ireland's legislation was evolving in tandem with these events in Brussels. After the Tobacco Products Directive was passed in Europe, the tobacco industry shifted their focus to Ireland. Their response was unprecedented and global. From members of the European Parliament to US congressmen, from Indonesian farmers to Irish retailers, we were lobbied on a scale that Irish politics had never seen before. But we had built a strong coalition that proved impenetrable to tobacco industry lobbying. Politicians from all parties and none joined forces to support this measure. Committed NGOs, non-government organisations from both the public health sector and the protection of children sector worked tirelessly to maintain public support. We formed a coalition whose resolve was unshakable. When the tobacco industry realised this, they changed tactics. Japan Tobacco International, Imperial Tobacco, and Philip Morris all threatened the government with legal action should our legislation proceed. The legal letter from Japan Tobacco International was especially aggressive. Not only did they attempt to tell a sovereign government that we did not have the authority to enact plain packaging legislation, they attempted to tell us how far we could progress it through our Parliament and insisted that we provide them with a written undertaking within a matter of days not to progress it any further. They did not receive any such undertaking. Our plain packaging bill was passed through our upper house and our lower house without a single member of Parliament or a single senator voting against it. There has been a battle to progress this legislation every step of the way, but these were all battles worth fighting. The Irish philosopher Edmund Burke said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." If we do nothing, the tobacco industry will delay and thwart public health legislation. But if we stand up to them, if we meet them head on, we will defeat them. Because their only aim is to protect their profits. Our aim and our duty is to protect the health of our people, especially that of our children. We have the truth on our side. And truth, as an old lady once told me, is not fragile. It won't break, nor will we. I've been asked repeatedly, why don't we wait to see how a larger country, one with a bigger legal arsenal, gets on with plain packaging before we proceed? Well, ladies and gentlemen, there is a time to follow and there is a time to lead. When one addiction is responsible for almost 1 in 5 deaths in our country, it's a time to lead. We have taken the lead from Australia, but we're now giving the lead to Europe. The UK have followed. France intends to move next, and we've heard from Doug many other countries are coming after. So will the rest of the world be that far behind? I don't believe so. I've worked as a doctor for almost 3 decades. I've seen firsthand the consequences of smoking. I've seen the painful deaths, watching patients gasp for air as their lungs fail, or watching them as they waste away from cancer. I've seen the devastation on the faces of their families and loved ones. All these deaths are entirely preventable. All these deaths for what? For nothing. Smoking gives nothing to smokers' lives and robs us all of so much. Robs us of 5,200 Irish people who die from smoking every year. Robs us of 700,000 Europeans who die of smoking every year. That's almost the population of Amsterdam, annihilated every single year. That's 700,000 families who must live their lives without their loved ones. Children losing a parent, spouses losing their partner. And while the economic impact of all this can be estimated, the human toll cannot. But there is hope. Throughout the developed world, smoking rates are falling. We now know the policies that do work. When we meet again here in 3 years' time, I hope cigarettes will be sold in plain packaging, not just in Australia and Ireland, but in the UK, France, Norway, Finland, New Zealand, and many, many other countries. I hope plain packaging will be driving down smoking rates throughout the world. Throughout the world, we have many committed NGOs and politicians who are showing their determination and the determination required to tackle this scourge head on. And that's why conferences like this are so important. We learn from each other. We learn what works. We learn to stand together. And despite their billions of euros and dollars and hidden connections, the tobacco industry can and will be defeated. We must rise to the challenge to protect our children from a killer addiction that ends the lives of half those who become addicted to it. Remember, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. We will not stand idly by. Our children cannot afford us to fail. Together, we can, we must, we will prevail. Thank you.
Thank you for that inspirational keynote address, Minister Riley. And the story continues, and of course the story is not complete without going back, as Minister Riley has indicated, to Australia's very bold leadership in being the first country in the world to adopt and implement plain packaging, despite the intense, aggressive, horrendous attacks by the tobacco industry. And we're lucky to have here today Mr. Nathan Smythe, friend and colleague from the Australian government. Nathan Smythe has been the first Assistant Secretary for of the Population Health Division in the Australian Government Department of Health since 2010. And Nathan's oversight of the introduction and implementation of the tobacco plain packaging has included ensuring that it is a single approach to the policy by the Australian government departments. And the whole of government aspect of this type of policy development and implementation is a real important part of this story. So over to you, Nathan.
And you're a hard act to follow, Minister Riley, so it was a very inspirational speech. Thank you very much. If I could seek the Chair's indulgence, I've just been asked to read out a short statement from Minister for Health in Australia. Unfortunately, Senator the Honourable Fiona Nash is unable to attend the conference today, but has asked me to present the following short message on her behalf. Dr. Wael Al-Mahmed, President of the World Congress on Tobacco Health, conference organisers and Emirates Cardiac Society, Professor Harry Lando, Chair of the Scientific Program Committee and members, ladies and gentlemen. I commend you for putting on the 16th World Conference on Tobacco Health. I'm delighted that so many countries, including Australia, have been able to send delegates. The conference provides an excellent opportunity to bring together academics, parliamentary and government officials, tobacco and healthcare workers and others who work in the field to develop and expand your contacts, share knowledge and learn about new and exciting ways to continue to put an end to smoking across the world. Consecutive governments in Australia have progressively introduced a comprehensive range of tobacco control measures and quit smoking campaigns, which together have seen Australia's daily smoking rates at the lowest ever in our national history. Today, fewer than 13% of those aged 14 years or older are daily smokers. The introduction of tobacco plain packaging as part of these measures has assisted with achieving this result. We are proud of what we've achieved, and we're willing to share some of the successes and lessons that we've learned in implementing our comprehensive approach to tobacco control. I hope you all enjoy the conference. Thank you. And then there were three, which is fantastic. It's nice to actually have a bit of a weight lifted off your shoulders if you're Australia and you've been fighting the plain packaging litigation that we have. So welcome to the best fight on earth, Ireland and the UK. This conference really does come at a critical stage in the global effort to reduce the use of tobacco and the harms that it causes. It comes at a time when many countries are pressing forward with the next steps in tobacco control, refusing to be cowed by tobacco industry efforts to thwart their advances. And I'm tremendously proud of what Australia has been able to show in this area, with full implementation of the world's first plain packaging of tobacco products on the 1st of December 2012. I'm not going to go into the evidence of the detail about whether plain packaging is working, except of course to say that it is. And I'll leave that to my stunning colleagues from the Victorian Cancer Council, Melanie and Michelle, to talk you through where we're at. My focus today is obviously on what governments can do, and Australia's experience is that it's a multi-pronged approach to tobacco control that is most effective. One that combines a range of strategies that reinforce and build on one another. Strategies that look to the long term, recognising nicotine's highly addictive qualities. They cover all tobacco products, address all aspects of supply and demand, and optimise the different roles that each level of government needs to play, as well as civil society groups who are integral in this fight. We need to strive to get ahead of the game, to understand the tactics, the loopholes, the gaps that the industry are going to exploit. And we've done that well in Australia. And the fabulous team that I've had working with me has been utterly forensic in being able to withstand the onslaught of the litigation and the tactics that the industry has deployed against us. But there are further legal challenges ahead, and we're ready for them. It means having not just an understanding of population health policies and our domestic laws, but also international frameworks, particularly now around trade and investment agreements. Finally, perhaps most importantly, we need to generously share our own experiences in order to learn from our collective history in fighting this epidemic. In Australia, plain packaging and updated graphic health warnings are part of a package that was announced in 2010 that you can see on the slides. It's not a magic bullet, plain packaging, to reducing smoking rates. We've never claimed that it was. But for Australia, it was the next logical step that we needed to take. It's come on top in Australia of an already established tobacco control regime, much of which was implemented by state and territory governments, and you can see some of those restrictions and regulations on the screen. This slide here shows the long-term incremental approach Australia's introduced over time to build and refine individual measures into a comprehensive tobacco control strategy. The graph shows the timing of the introduction of some of our most significant tobacco control measures tracked against our falling smoking rates. But even with a comprehensive tobacco control strategy, no individual measure can cause smoking rates to drop overnight. The industry argues that if change is not immediate, then it's a failed policy. But they never mention that nicotine is one of the most addictive drugs on the planet and that quitting is incredibly difficult. Research suggests that around 90% of Australian smokers have regretted ever having started. It's important for governments to be informed of the tactics that the industry deploys. They lobby against us in Australia on a regular basis, and throughout the consultation period of our tobacco plain packaging legislation, they undertook a number of actions to oppose our measures. They used large-scale campaigns on television, radio, print advertising, social media. They inserted cards into cigarette packs. We received enormous numbers of freedom of information requests from the industry, some of which tied us up in terms of resources into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. They just didn't want us to implement plain packaging. And they're continuing to use those tactics to delay other countries to do the same. It'd be naive to think that legal challenges are not a possibility. And we've faced one legal challenge domestically, and we're in the midst of two enormous international legal challenges at the moment, but we're in really good shape. One thing I want to highlight to you is some of the industry commissioned reports and the lies that they continue to peddle. One strategy that they employ is to commission obviously their own research. Our experience with these reports is that you need to look at them with caution and see that they're commissioned for specific undisclosed parameters and purposes. They're based on small population samples. They're online surveys with a self-selection bias. And they're based on the false premise that a substantial drop in smoking prevalence needs to be immediate. This slide shows the disclaimer from a KPMG report on illicit consumption of tobacco in Australia. They reckon it's around 14%. Their sample size is picking up litter out of garbage bins in Australia. We commissioned research of over 20,000 people that estimates the illicit trade's probably running at around 2%. The report goes on to say that their illicit trade report by KPMG should not be therefore regarded as suitable or used or relied on by any other person for any other purpose. It's not a standard clause in any KPMG report, and even the creators of the report caution against relying on them. In contrast to this, the weight of scientific evidence supports that plain packaging is working and meeting its objectives. I encourage other governments to be courageous and to continue to introduce evidence-based tobacco control measures, and I commend those that have done so. At the same time, we can't afford to underestimate the extent of the industry's commitment to defend their business model. We're keen in Australia to share our resources, our experience, and to reach out to other countries so that we can all benefit from our collective expertise. United we stand, divided we fall. The new findings from a 45 and up study in Australia state that now 2 in every 3 smokers will die as a result of their smoking habit if they continue to smoke. Previously, it was estimated it was 15%. Now it's 66%. And there are still 2.7 million smokers in Australia, and we don't think that that's acceptable. It's a long-term battle. It means, however, the battle's definitely not won, but we're proud of our significant and hard-won gains in Australia. We're witnessing now unprecedented rates, but we've still got a long way to go. And one of the most significant measures of success is stopping the next generation from smoking. The awful reality is that the industry needs new addicts to replace the ones that it kills, to fuel its lucrative business model. The US Surgeon General reports that 9 out of 10 smokers start before they reach the age of 18, and very few start after the age of 25. So if we stop our kids smoking, the industry's business model starts to collapse. This slide demonstrates the increase in the age of initiation in Australia between 1995 and 2013. The average age at which the current smoking population took up smoking is increasing, and we need to see that trend continue. It's one of those slides when you see it going up, normally when you talk about tobacco it's not good, but this is actually the reverse and it's a good story. So what can governments do? Well, really, it's all there in the FCTC, and some of the actions that we've taken are here on the slide. And you need to be comprehensive in your approach to tobacco control. Each country's different, and different strategies and different combinations of actions may make sense in your local context. But there's plenty that can be done, and we stand ready to support those countries taking their next steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Some of you may not be aware that in Australia currently there's concern about tropical cyclone Nathan, and I think you've just seen why. It's now my privilege to introduce 2 very remarkable scientists. You may be aware that overnight the BMJ's Tobacco Control Journal published a special edition on plain packaging evaluation, which has 14 meticulous research papers on plain package evaluation from Australia. That's available online but some copies will also be available here at the end of the session. The two lead authors are Professor Melanie Wakefield and Michelle Scolo, and as they have the task of distilling what they've written and all their work into 10 minutes each, they will get the briefest of introductions from me, other than to say that I think we're amazingly privileged to have two such remarkable scientists, researchers working in this area, and it is therefore an enormous privilege to introduce first the Director of the Centre for Behavioural Research in Cancer at the Cancer Council Victoria, Professor Melanie Wakefield.
Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to present these results to you today. In the past 4 years, the tobacco industry has repeatedly asserted that the success of plain packaging should be judged according to whether or not smoking prevalence declined about 10 seconds after plain packaging was implemented. And furthermore, they asserted that the decline should be greater than anything we've previously observed. For anyone who understands how tobacco policies work, this is not a realistic test of plain packaging. Policies take time to exert their effects, and smoking prevalence is an insensitive outcome, usually changing quite slowly from year to year. Smoking prevalence is like the last stop on a train journey with many routes that could be travelled to get to the destination. Smoking prevalence is going to be the aggregate end result of the combination of tobacco policies and programs that are implemented. And it's also going to be affected by what the tobacco industry does to push back against any policies, for example, by using price discounting and the like. If we want to get an idea of whether our plain packaging policy of interest is having its intended effects, we need to focus much more on when the train begins to leave the station. In other words, to focus on whether the policy is achieving its specific objectives in the first year or so after implementation. This will tell us whether or not a contribution down the track to reducing smoking prevalence might ultimately be realised. There are 3 specific objectives of plain packaging as listed here, and I'm going to draw from a series of new studies just released this morning to provide you with new evidence about the achievement of these specific objectives. In addition to the many experimental, qualitative and naturalistic published studies which have examined how smokers and adolescents would respond to a simulated policy of plain packaging, as shown on this slide, there are at least 6 published studies of the newly implemented policy on Australian smokers' thoughts and behaviours. The new studies I will present today come from surveys of high school students, a national cross-sectional survey of smokers in Australia, and a continuous series of cohort studies of Australian smokers. So, to the first objective of reducing the appeal of tobacco products. In surveys of over 6,000 high school students before and then after the new packaging, the wonderful Dr. Vicky White found a marked reduction in agreement that some brands have better looking packs than others. In the same study, on a positive pack image scale from 1 to 5, despite starting from quite a low base in 2001, after plain packaging in a low base in 2011, after plain packaging in 2013, students perceive cigarette packs in general to have an even less positive pack image. And when looking at the 4 most popular Australian brands, you can see all brands had less favourable brand character ratings after the packaging changes. Among adult cigarette smokers, in this national cross-sectional tracking survey of about 400 smokers a month, we compared the 6 months before plain packaging on the left with the 2 months of transition to plain packaging in the middle and the first full year of plain packaging implementation on the right. We found a substantial increase after plain packaging in cigarette smokers disliking their packs and saying their packs had lower appeal than a year before. And you can see this even began to emerge during the transition period. We also found significant increases in smokers thinking their cigarettes were lower in value, lower in quality, and lower in satisfaction when compared to smokers surveyed before plain packaging. And finally, we found a significant increase after plain packaging in smokers believing that different brands had the same prestige. This is in the direction predicted, namely that brands became more similar to each other after plain packaging. There was no change overall in smokers who believed all brands taste the same, but there were increases in brands tasting the same among younger and middle-aged smokers. So summarising, overall we found change in the expected direction of reduced appeal for 6 of the 7 appeal outcomes we examined. These changes occurred equally in both males and females and all socioeconomic groups. There were clear age group differences for the appeal outcomes. Just 2 examples here demonstrating that young adults in the red showed more pronounced change in the expected direction for disliking packs and finding cigarettes to be lower in quality after plain packaging. So these stronger findings for younger people on reduced appeal, combined with the adolescent results I showed you, are consistent with what we know about how important branding and image is for younger people. The second objective was to increase the effectiveness of health warnings. In our adolescent survey, we found no change over time in students paying close attention to or reading the warnings. Not shown here, we also found no change in thinking about or talking about the health warnings or avoiding having a cigarette because of them. So the information contained in the health warnings didn't really engage high school students. Rather, as I presented earlier, these larger graphic health warnings undoubtedly contributed to reducing the positive image of packs and making packs less appealing. Among adult smokers, though, we found more noticing of warnings and more smokers saying the warnings made them much more motivated to quit in the first full year after plain packaging. We found that despite the larger warning size, they remained credible for most smokers, with most agreeing the harms of smoking were not exaggerated. This attests to the careful pre-testing of the larger health warnings in the development of the Australian plain packs. Finally, we found an increase in smokers who had sometimes concealed their packs or asked for a different health warning when they purchased their cigarettes. And these are responses that predict quit attempts in the future. Overall, our expectations were confirmed for all 5 health warning effectiveness outcomes in adult smokers. The third objective of plain packaging was to reduce the ability of packaging to mislead consumers about smoking harms. In the adolescent survey, we had some mixed results which suggest there was greater uncertainty about differences between brands in smoking harms and other harm-related concepts. For example, here, there was an increase in the percentage who didn't know if some brands are easier to smoke than others, but this was fed by a reduction in both agree and disagree responses. Overall, the pattern of findings suggested a disruption of students' beliefs, with more uncertainty about the differences between brands. In the National Tracking Survey of adult smokers, in the first full year of plain packaging, we found a significant increase in the percentage of smokers who agreed brands were the same in harmfulness. So this is a more accurate belief, and it's in the direction we'd want to see. We found no differences in 2 other outcomes about whether smokers thought their own brand was more harmful or whether brand variants were the same in strength. Overall then, some correction for adult smokers of their inaccurate beliefs. We also looked at more downstream influences of these early responses on subsequent quitting thoughts and attempts. We added a cohort study to the National Tracking Survey, so all smokers were followed up a month later. Compared with the period before plain packaging, we found higher quit attempt rates early in the transition to plain packaging and in the first full year of plain packaging implementation. Not shown here, we also found increases in concealing of packs and stubbing out of cigarettes in the first year of plain packaging and several other positive quitting-related outcomes. In the tracking survey, we used the cohort study component to examine which early responses best predicted follow-up quitting thoughts and attempts 1 month later. Across the top, the follow-up outcomes were 3 micro behaviours, which are explained on the slide, 3 quitting thoughts and quit attempts. The appeal early response variables independently predicted some of the follow-up micro behaviours and quitting thoughts. The health warning early response variables predicted all 3 of the micro behaviours and all 3 quitting thoughts. And we also found the health warning early response variables predicted quit attempts at follow-up. And the accurate harm early response variable did not predict any of the follow-up outcomes. So in combination, these cohort studies suggest that the early responses to the packaging changes are acting to increase the likelihood of quitting outcomes, with the health warning responses being the more important. In summary, we conclude that the specific objectives of plain packaging were largely met in the first full year of implementation. Younger people were more influenced by reduced brand and pack appeal, while adult smokers were more influenced by the larger graphic health warnings, which were the main driver of quitting thoughts and attempts. And this is consistent with plain packaging making health warnings appear more noticeable and more serious. It does not mean that reduced branding is unimportant for adult smokers. Remember, we did find reduced appeal for adult smokers overall in the tracking survey, and in the cohort study, some of the appeal early responses independently predicted some of the quitting outcomes. This pattern of early results means that the train has well and truly left the station, and it means we're heading in the right direction to see contributions down the track to reducing smoking uptake among youth and increasing quitting in adults. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Mel, for that terrific presentation. And the next of our stellar scientists, who will also report on the progress of the train down the tracks, is one of the people whom we certainly regard in Australia as just one of our great scientists and researchers who's made a huge contribution to tobacco control over the years, and that's Dr. Michelle Scollo from the Vic Health Centre for Tobacco Control.
From the Centre for Behavioural Research in Cancer.
Oh, didn't say that on my notes.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike, and thank you for the opportunity to present the work that we've been doing over the past 3 years. Prior to the introduction of plain packaging, the tobacco industry predicted numerous unintended consequences. First, catastrophic losses for small business. Second, an explosion in use of illicit tobacco, as plain packs would be so much easier to counterfeit. Third, a collapse in prices across the market, but particularly among premium brands, for which it argued consumers would no longer be prepared to pay. And as a result of shifts to cheaper purchase channels, illicit tobacco and cheaper brands, the industry argued that there would be an increase in consumption and hence unintended negative consequences for public health. Our group analysed data from the National Plain Packaging Tracking Survey and undertook several desktop and field studies to assess the extent to which any of these dire predictions eventuated. Today I'll give you a brief overview of what we found. The prediction that small shops would suffer was based on the theory that shopkeepers would take longer to find the correct pack once all the packs looked the same. Customers previously happy to pay slightly higher prices for the convenience of being able to shop quickly at corner stores would, it was claimed, grow tired of waiting in queues and shift their custom to cheaper outlets such as supermarket chains. We decided to actually go out and measure, using pocket stopwatches, how long it took retailers to locate a specific pack. On average, prior to plain packaging, it took between 10 and 11 seconds. Retailers were a second or so slower following introduction, but within the next couple of weeks, days really of our December 2012 collection period, and certainly by the next month, retrieval times had returned to normal. So not surprisingly, in our national survey, when we asked smokers before and after introduction, from where they had purchased their last pack, there was no change in the percentage purchasing from small business. Let's look then at prediction number 2. In Australia, there have been 2 major forms of illicit tobacco. First, unbranded, roughly processed tobacco that people buy mostly in plastic bags and make up into cigarettes themselves. This so-called chop-chop tobacco was quite troublesome in the early 2000s and the subject of considerable enforcement effort by Australian tax authorities. We were very keen to detect any use whatsoever and provided 4 different questions in the survey where chop-chop could be provided as a response option. The other sort of illicit tobacco in Australia, like elsewhere, is contraband cigarettes. But let's look first at what happened on chop-chop. The change in the negligible percentage of smokers reporting chop-chop as their regular brand was not significant. The percentage who reported any use whatsoever at any point in the survey stayed at about 3% throughout the entire period. And we actually found a significant decline in the percentage of smokers who had purchased unbranded tobacco in the previous month, which is probably the best indicator of regular use. We also tried to assess changes in use of contraband cigarettes. Now, this includes cigarettes which are produced by licensed manufacturers but are somehow diverted from the legal market, and also counterfeits produced by operators other than the company that holds the trademark for particular brands. A third subcategory of contraband cigarettes is cheap whites, such as these Manchesters and Moderns, which are known to be fake brands produced specifically for the illicit market. Now, not being able to examine actual packs in our telephone survey, we could not estimate the absolute prevalence of use of contraband cigarettes. However, what we did do is to take 3 quite objective criteria to assess changes pre compared to post-implementation of plain packaging. So in our survey, we asked all smokers about the brand and size and price of the last pack of tobacco they had purchased. And from this, first of all, we pulled out any examples of known or likely cheap whites. Second, we looked at international brands such as Marlboro, Craven A and Dunhill, which are all premium brands in Australia and very rarely discounted. We reported on those which were purchased for substantially less than the recommended price. And finally, we reported on people purchasing from an informal source. There was no significant increase over time in any of these measures, and overall very low incidence of each of these indicators of illicit status. Now, these findings are, of course, in sharp contrast to the estimates by tobacco companies, which put rates of use of contraband cigarettes based on litter studies considerably higher than what is being found in survey data such as ours. Now, there are 2 main things to say about this at this point. First, remember that the main mechanism by which the tobacco industry claimed that plain packaging would increase illicit tobacco was because the packs would be easier to counterfeit. However, even in the latest report by the London-based KPMG consulting company, which of course is funded by the tobacco industry, and as Nathan noticed, has put a major disclaimer on the front of its report in this instance, to the middle of 2014, there was no evidence of counterfeit plain packs from any of the litter surveys on which estimates were based. Over 12,000 packs collected in each of the 3 surveys since implementation. In fact, it wasn't until a couple of weeks ago that British American Tobacco first reported finding a single example of a counterfeited plain pack, a very poorly counterfeited one at that, in a shop audit, and this is more than 2 years after implementation. And secondly, there has been no notable change in the overall quantity of illicit tobacco detected in customs interceptions over the last few years. Changes perhaps in the amounts of contraband cigarettes, the red part of the bar, relative to raw loose tobacco in the blue, but certainly no major changes over time in the overall quantity detected, despite the very large increase in excise and customs duty on tobacco products in Australia in April 2010. So let's move on to prediction number 3, that there would be dramatic reductions in prices. From our desk-based research, we looking at retailer trade magazines, we noted that even after adjusting for inflation, so that everything here is expressed in 2013 dollars, there were very large increases in recommended retail prices between 2011 and 2013. Contrary to industry predictions that there would be a collapse in premium prices, in fact, the increase in prices of premium and mid-priced products was more than 50% greater than the increase in the price of the low-cost or so-called value brands. But this is just recommended retail prices. What actually happened in shops? If you come to the symposium tomorrow, I'll tell you more about our monthly audit of prices in more than 420 retail outlets. But briefly, the price of a single pack of cigarettes where this was listed highest on the price board, almost always a premium brand, remained stable in real terms in the lead up to introduction, which was the blue line, and then increased sharply. At the other extreme was the lowest price pack on the board. For these, the prices dipped slightly in real terms in the lead up to introduction, but then also increased, though not as steeply as the prices of the premium brands at the top of the price boards. But increases in the recommended and advertised prices is only part of the story. In the year prior to plain packaging, we saw each of the major three companies introduce very low-priced brands, cheaper than any existing value products on the market. Philip Morris came up with Bond Street, in a first for Australia, came in packs of 26s as well as 20s. BAT launched Just Smokes, and Imperial Tobacco also had its own low-cost brand, in this case a whole brand family with something for everyone. As I'll describe in more detail tomorrow, there was a large increase in product offerings in the value segment of the market. So not surprisingly, our national tracking survey predicted, or detected rather, a substantial increase in the use of these low-priced brands during the course of the study. The third indicator of price we looked at was what smokers actually paid for their tobacco products, as reported in our tracking survey. Prices paid by those using premium brands went up by more than prices paid by those using the low-priced brands. Overall, even taking into account the shift in the market to the low-priced brands, mean prices paid by consumers still went up overall and were 2.3% higher in real terms, despite there being no real increases in taxes over the first year after introduction. So with so many consumers now choosing cheaper products, and some of which offered more sticks in the pack, did we see an increase in consumption? Well, in fact, we could not detect any change in consumption following introduction. But in Australia, in addition to this plain packaging measure, on the 1st of December 2013, the Australian government increased excise and customs duty on tobacco, resulting in something like a 10% increase in prices. And after that, we did find a significant decline in reported consumption, which was exactly in line with what you'd expect based on international estimates of price elasticity. So, in summary, retailers appeared to quickly adapt to the new cognitive demands of plain packs, and we could detect no decline in the percentage of smokers purchasing from small business corner stores. There is so far no evidence of an explosion in counterfeiting, and consumer surveys suggest lower levels and no evidence of an increase in purchase from informal channels or use of cheap whites. Use of loose and other unbranded chop-top tobacco declined. Prices have most definitely not fallen. In fact, prices have increased by so much that there's been an acceleration in the shift to value brands that started back in 2010 after our 25% increase in tobacco taxes. Despite the large number of smokers shifting to cheaper brands, we could detect no increase in consumption among those adults who continue to smoke in Australia. Reported numbers of cigarettes declined as usual after the December 2013 tax increase. So in all, we can say that the data so far suggests that none of the dire consequences predicted by the tobacco industry has so far eventuated in Australia. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, for that cutting edge and very timely expose of the solid scientific evidence supporting plain packaging. I think everyone in the room, we must make this mandatory reading for all World Conference participants. Certainly it will be my bedtime reading tonight. So let's move on to now the next phase of our panel, is to look at the next generation of standardized packaging. And hopefully this next generation of standardized plain packaging will grow at an exponential rate of development. So the first speaker to share the recent and fascinating and excellent news from the UK is Mr. Andrew Black, who is the Tobacco Program Manager at the UK Department of Health. He's worked there since 2006. He's led the implementation of smoke-free legislation in England, raising the age of sale of tobacco, the introduction of picture warnings, removing tobacco displays from shops, and ending the sale of tobacco from vending machines. And he has been instrumental in introducing legislation to end smoking in cars carrying children, and also now the introduction of the recent and now approved standardized packaging legislation in the UK.
Well, thank you very much, Doug, and I have no doubt at all that you'll read this tobacco control edition cover to cover as soon as the session's over. But hello to everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me to provide an update from the United Kingdom. And I'm very pleased to have the opportunity, because we have good news to report. On Monday this week, our Parliament approved the legislation necessary to require standardised packaging of tobacco products in the United Kingdom. Our new law has been based, broadly speaking, on that from Australia, including the standard colour that all packs will need to be. And this is what our new packs will look like from May next year. And shops will have, from May next year, 1 year to sell out their old stock. At the same time, we'll bring into place provisions set out in the new European Union Tobacco Products Directive, including large picture health warnings to cover 65% of the front and the back of the pack. And I also wanted to take this opportunity to congratulate Minister Riley for his leadership in getting this important directive in place, which will deliver significant benefits for people across the European Union. Having looked carefully at the evidence and the range of arguments, health ministers in the United Kingdom are clear that standardised packaging is highly likely to bring health benefits and that it should be a key element of our tobacco control strategy. The British government has taken a careful and deliberate approach to policy and decision-making on standardised packaging. Within our comprehensive tobacco control strategy that was published in 2011, we undertook to look at whether standardised packaging of tobacco products could be effective in reducing smoking rates, especially among children. And since then, we've had extensive engagement with the public and with stakeholders, including 2 major public consultations. We received over 500,000 responses to our first consultation, with the majority of these in the form of postcards and emails as part of campaigns run by those in support of and those in opposition to standardised packaging. And it became very clear quickly to us that people either love standardised packaging or they hate it. The second consultation that we ran presented draft regulations for stakeholders to consider. We commissioned a systematic academic review of the evidence relating to standardised packaging that was published alongside our first consultation. And in 2013, Health Ministers commissioned Sir Cyril Chandler, an eminent doctor and medical researcher, to undertake an independent review into whether standardised packaging would be likely to have an effect on public health, particularly in relation to children. The review concluded that it's very likely that standardised packaging would have a positive impact on public health. The Department of Health has carefully considered all of the responses to the consultations, together with extensive consideration of the evidence and the wider issues, including potential unintended consequences, in coming to the decision to move forward with this policy. And the Department of Health is very clear that the evidence supports the objectives of our new law. We believe that over time, standardised packaging is likely to have benefits for both children and adults who smoke. While the public health community is unanimously behind the idea, the opponents of standardised packaging have told us that there's no evidence to support its introduction. In fact, the opposite is true. So Cyril Chartler's independent review found the evidence points in a single direction and that there's no convincing evidence pointing the other way. We also looked carefully at whether there are any less restrictive measures available to us, and we found that there were no other measures that would achieve our aim of reducing the promotional impact of tobacco packaging. We've finalised an impact assessment that looked in detail at the costs and benefits from an economic standpoint, and from this the government concluded that the benefits of introducing standardised packaging would be worth billions through reduced smoking rates, and these benefits would far outweigh any of the costs associated with introducing this legislation. The United Kingdom's Customs and Revenue Department, which has responsibility for tackling illicit tobacco, has undertaken a detailed assessment of the likely impact of standardised packaging on the illicit tobacco trade and concluded that there's no evidence to suggest that the introduction of standardised packaging will have a significant impact on the overall size of the illicit market or prompt a step change in the activity of organised crime groups in the United Kingdom. We believe that standardised packaging is a justified and proportionate response to the major and ongoing public health challenge from tobacco, and that the new laws will be defensible in the courts. But we do recognise the reality that there are legal risks associated with standardised packaging. Our experience tells us that the tobacco industry are prepared to put huge resources into bringing legal challenges against tobacco control measures, and we're prepared for that. Yes, the tobacco companies have already made threats that they intend to legally challenge our new standardised packaging laws, but our ministers have been clear that we will defend the new laws robustly and that we have powerful arguments in our favour. I can say that we would not be proceeding with standardised packaging if we did not believe that the laws were defensible. I want to finish my contribution to this session on the globalisation of standardised packaging by offering our support and encouragement to any country considering moving ahead with standardised packaging. So please get in touch with us if we can help. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andrew, and congratulations on UK's great accomplishments. The third home run for standardised plain packaging in a short period of time, following Australia and Ireland. Many more to come. Let's switch to now the country update from New Zealand. We know that New Zealand's been working on legislation, and Professor Richard Edwards is trained in medicine and public health in the UK. He came to the University of Otago, Wellington in 2005, where he's co-director of Aspire 2025, a research collaboration carrying out research to help achieve a smoke-free New Zealand by 2025. And his research interests include plain packaging. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much. I'd like to talk about, provide an update from New Zealand, but also talk a little bit about the features of the proposed legislation, some observations on lessons learnt so far, and also give some acknowledgements. So first of all, the update. Following Australia's decision to proceed with plain packaging, the New Zealand government expressed an intention to follow suit back in April 2012. There followed a public consultation and there was a regulatory impact statement, and then Minister Turia, who is in the audience, reported back and presented a paper to Cabinet recommending the introduction of standardised packaging in November 2012. The Cabinet agreed to that in principle, and in December 2013 legislation was introduced to Parliament, and it had its first reading, the sort of first debate, in February 2014. Following that, the usual process in New Zealand is that the bill then goes to a select committee, in this case the Health Select Committee, for further consideration, and there's public submissions and hearings at that stage. So that occurred, and the Health Select Committee reported back essentially supporting the bill, other than some minor changes, for example changing the title from plain packaging to standardised packaging, or recommending that change. Then in September 2014 there was an election in New Zealand which created a little bit of a delay. And subsequent to the election, in which the same government has been re-elected, we're now awaiting the reintroduction of the bill for its second reading, which is sort of the main sort of debate in Parliament. One thing I should say is that the Cabinet has expressed throughout concerns about possible legal challenges and WTO appeals processes, and has stated that this may delay the introduction of the legislation, and the Prime Minister has said the same. The legislation in New Zealand, the feature of it is that there's primary enabling legislation which specifies the requirement for standardised packaging and introduces penalties and so on. And then once that legislation is introduced, it is implemented through secondary regulations, which are the detail of the legislation. So the current status is we're waiting for the bill to be introduced for its second reading. That's a little bit unclear when that's going to happen. There's some uncertainty about that at the moment. And there are a variety of scenarios possible in New Zealand. The bill could be introduced and passed, and then the regulations may be introduced immediately, or they may be delayed, subject to the WTO appeals. And so at the moment, I think what's happening is the legislation has been passing through the process as intended. There's been a couple of delays, like due to the election and so on, but essentially it's been keeping to track. But we have got a little bit of uncertainty about the timetable going forward for when the legislation will be finally, hopefully passed, and the regulations introduced. So that's where we are in New Zealand at the moment. A couple of things to mention about the legislation. At the same time as in Australia, there are improvements to the pictorial health warnings are proposed to be introduced, including increasing the size and some changes to the nature of those warnings. And the legislation does also include some permissive clauses relating to product design, so it could be, but this is by no means certain, but it could be an avenue for adjunct measures such as introducing standardised sticks and dissuasive coloured sticks. That's a possibility, but that's, as I say, by no means certain. So the learning points from New Zealand, first of just the importance of evidence, which I think has come up repeatedly in the talk so far. It's clear from the Cabinet documents, the regulatory impact statements and so on, that both the international evidence and local evidence has been absolutely crucial for the underpinning for the case. The evidence, though, of course, is not enough. We need good advocates, we need champions, we need broad public and political support. In New Zealand, the Australian example has been particularly critical, and that's both because Australians are our friends and neighbours and so have a lot of influence, but also there's a particular trans-Tasman mutual recognition arrangement which promotes regulatory alignment, which gives a particular impetus. As in other countries, the plain packaging, standardised packaging debate has brought the tobacco industry out into the open. In New Zealand, the industry had been very low profile until plain packaging was proposed, and it really has come out fighting, all guns blazing. So for other countries, it's very clear you can expect resistance. And I think the other thing is just I think the experience demonstrates that there are other opportunities as well as standardised packaging. There's other things that can be done with health warnings, with looking at the sticks. Why don't we make the sticks dissuasive, change the colour of sticks to be an unpleasant colour that is not appealing to smokers, making the pack promote quitting in every way possible. I think we should be thinking about other possibilities. I want to just finish off with some acknowledgements. Firstly, I want to acknowledge a key role of our champion. I said that its evidence is not enough and we need champions, and our champion has been former Associate Minister Tariana Turia. She has been absolutely instrumental in New Zealand, both with standardised packaging but also with Smoke-Free 2025, and I think we would all like to acknowledge her contribution to tobacco control in New Zealand and internationally. I'd also like to acknowledge once again the role of Australia as a global leader and sticking their neck out and going first. Well done to them. And as an academic, I would particularly like to acknowledge the researchers who have created such a strong evidence base, and both internationally, the researchers such as, I'm just mentioning a few names here, but there's many, many. So Dave Hammond in Canada, Crawford Moody from Scotland, Janet Hook, my colleague in New Zealand. But of course, very importantly, the Australian researchers, and obviously we've heard from Melanie and Michelle, and we've heard mention of other names, Vicky White, Sarah Durkin, Emily Brennan, and Megan Bailey, amongst many others. They really have done a huge amount for this globalisation of standardised packaging. And I'd also like to mention Kylie Lindorf and team at Cancer Council Victoria for their work in countering that avalanche of misinformation that's been coming from the tobacco industry. It's been an enormous effort on their behalf to do that, and they've done that obviously for Australia, but they've also done it for the whole global tobacco community, and I think their role should be acknowledged. So I'd like to leave it there, say that hopefully in New Zealand we're on track. The timetable is a bit uncertain, but I'm also hoping that the momentum of Ireland and the UK and Norway and others will mean that we get over the line as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard, and thanks for sharing New Zealand's experience, and we wish New Zealand all the best in speedy adoption of the standardized plain packaging legislation, given the global momentum. And we'll finalize our discussion of recent developments with Norway, and I'll invite Annelise Riel, who's a Norwegian lawyer, and we need lots of lawyers on these cases, given the armies of lawyers that the tobacco industry is recruiting to oppose plain packaging, standardized packaging. Annelise served as State Secretary at the Ministry of Justice and then as Deputy Director General of the Norwegian Directorate of Health. And Ms. Riel has been Secretary General of the Norwegian Cancer Society since 2002 and is instrumental in working with the government of Norway to release recently the public consultation document on proposed plain packaging this week. Annelise.
Thank you. This is what a smiling NGO face looks like. And the reason I'm smiling is that I'm actually very happy with the Norwegian government right now, and especially with the Minister of Health. And the reason is that he announced 3-4 weeks ago that Norway and the government wants Norway to go for plain packaging. And actually, the day before yesterday, the consultation paper was sent out. And why did he do so? One thing is that we, the civil society, the NGOs, we've been wanting plain packaging for many years, and we've been looking to Australia particularly. But last year, our Minister of Health was in Geneva, the World Health Assembly, meeting up with some Australians, seeing all these examples of packagings, the plain packagings, the cigarette packs. And then he realized that his challenge, how to make the next generation smoke-free, how to reach 25, all these things, his obligations, he finally saw the answer. This could really be very helpful. So that's the reason. And now I just want to pick up on 3-4 things very fast. That's SNIF, that's networks, that's NGOs, and that is the Tobacco Convention 5.3, Article 5.3. First, on something called snus or sniffs. In Norway, the Minister of Health could have said smoking amongst the young decreases, and now it's only about 5%. So why should he really worry? But in Norway, we have also something else, and that is also tobacco, but it's called snuff. You don't have it in Europe, but it's made from Swedish match, and in Norway, this has been increasing every year. And talking about plain packaging, it will be also this, the snuff boxes. It will not only be the tobacco plain packaging, the other package of that. It will be both. And I want to mention 2 or 3 things, because you can look to Norway now and just follow what will happen in Norway. We see that what will happen is that the industry will target us saying, why should we also include snuff? Because snuff is tobacco in it, but it's less harmful than cigarettes. And the tobacco industry all the time says, this is to quit smoke, this is a very good alternative. So why don't you just keep it a good alternative and not include it in this? And our answer is, it's not the same people. The people that smoke are not the same that are using this snuff. This is mainly used by the very young ones. So for them, you have to compare how harmful is this with doing nothing. But we will see we have to challenge the industry on this issue, and that is very interesting for all of you to see when we are talking about plain packaging. What do you include? Do you include only smoking cigarettes, or do you include all the other products also, and what will happen? These, I said, young people smoke them, or you don't smoke it, you put it here. The industry often says that they are concerned about the grown-ups, and that's the market. These things, I think it's 70% of the young ones started before they were 20. More than 50% started using this before they were 18. And you can see they are getting younger and younger. They are not adults. They are influenced by the industry in a different way. So if you talk about the nanny state, you can't talk about it when you talk about people that are not grown-ups yet. The other thing about this is actually in Norway, I have shown you 3 different ones. We have 97 different snus designs. They might be the same inside, but it's a question of image. You buy an image, you buy the way you want to look, who you are, who you want to pretend you are. And also the industry, one of these was actually won a prize as the best design in Norway. So this is also a proof of how design, branding, marketing is very, very important. So hopefully this can also be used of you when you are arguing towards the industry, that even if you don't have snus, this is how it all works. The other thing I wanted to mention was networks. We all know there's a lot of knowledge out throughout the world dealing with how the academic side, the legal sides, the economical sides, how the industry works. Lately, there's been more and more networks. You have umbrella organizations like the UICC, you have the NCD Alliance, you have the FCA, you have the McCabe Center, you have smoke-free partnerships. All this is very important because we connect. And I think the most important thing is actually our phone. With this one, we can connect, read emails, and be in touch within hours. And that makes a big change. We saw when the Minister of Health was announcing plain packaging, all of a sudden there was these persons approaching the journalists saying there's this what was the report again called? The one you were talking about just now. I can't find it. The Australian reports about the illicit trade. That one was shown to the journalists, and they started to wonder, you know, isn't this is a research again? What is the health minister talking about? And then he could say, and we could say, listen, we know that report. It's been used in Australia. We know it's financed by the industry. And in that way, within hours, We have a knowledge we couldn't have before, and that's very helpful, and that informs us all regarding how the industry and the big tobacco will work. I am talking we all the time. The reason I say we, I'm not the Minister of Health, I'm an NGO. But what we've done in Norway, and what he did, was when he announced plain packaging, he asked the Norwegian Cancer Society to stand next to him and take an active role. So we also were the face together with the Minister of Health. And I tell that because I think that's actually quite a good idea, because what we can do as NGOs is we can be, and we are, the face of the people. So we can be the face of the people saying, what the government is doing now, we agree fully, because it affects us, we don't want it. We also can be much bolder. We can talk more directly and come with examples how the industry works and how they will try to use their arguments. And the media attention is much, much bigger when we are together. So that I also think is good practice, and hopefully that will help others if they do the same. Lastly, I just wanted to mention that the day before yesterday, when this consultation paper came out, it's not only about plain packaging. Actually, our Minister of Health, listening to Australia, listening to Ireland, listening to UK, understanding more how the industry will influence the politics, realizing that Norway, we are quite naive when it comes to that. WHO have told us that we should really fulfill our obligations regarding the Tobacco Convention 5.3. As many other countries, the same problem. We don't really realize how the tobacco industry works. So the suggestion now in this consultation paper is that Norway take Article 5.3, translate it into Norwegian legislation. Because in that way, it will be much more effective, because it will be known by the civil society and others, and we can use it in a different way. So in this consultation report, as this is mentioned, the consultation report has examples of all we know how the industry works. So it's now shown to everyone. And it also says that for the hearing, all that wants to come with a response will have to tell who they are, conflict of interest, if they somehow are influenced by paid by the industry. If you are pointing at any research, you have to document it, and you have to document that it's not financed by the industry. This is the first time I've ever seen it, at least in Norway. So I just wanted to mention it and say, perhaps this could also be, because we are so thankful to Australia in particular, so hopefully this could be a help and something to take back and work on. And for all of us, I think we really have the momentum right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, and it really is inspirational to hear of what other countries are doing and how people are taking a lead in various different ways. We're running a bit over time, and so what we're going to do is we'll just keep this session going for a bit longer, but we'll let you away in time for lunch. We're going to have a brief session of questions, and there are two things I'd want to say ahead of that. First is to the speakers, if you could keep the answers fairly brief so we can keep this all going. And to the audience, we have a camera and we're going to take photographs of any of you who leave before the end of the session. So first question, I think we'll ask one or two to speakers and then we'll broaden out to the panel, and we'll do it from here just in terms of speed and time. First question, perhaps if I can ask Minister Riley. Minister, you had tremendous support from all political parties and the entire community. How did you manage that?
I think that Annalisa has referred to it. It was very important at the outset that we got a coalition together of many of the NGOs and charities, not just those related with health, like the Irish Cancer Society, the Tobacco Free Institute, the Irish Heart Foundation and others, but also those that were involved with children, the Children's Rights Alliance, and a large organisation at home like Barnados, who are very much involved in child protection and child care. to get the message across loudly and clearly that this was a serious issue, that 80% of smokers start when they're children, that once you're addicted, you can't exercise choice, and that this plain packaging would stop children from ever taking up smoking, and ultimately that this habit would die out.
Great. Thank you, Minister. Melanie, a question for you. Some people might think that pack avoidance is not a good outcome because people don't actually see the warning information. Can you explain why warning avoidance is a positive outcome in the research you described? Thanks.
Yes, we did find that people concealed packs a little more or asked for a different health warning, and these are kind of small behaviours that have been shown to increase the likelihood of making a quit attempt further down the track via a pathway of increased thinking about the harms of smoking. I think concealing packs is also a positive outcome because there are fewer opportunities for other smokers to be cued to smoke by seeing cigarette packs, and also fewer opportunities for children to be exposed to cigarette packs. One of the 14 studies in the special issue of tobacco control, which is available up the front here if you'd like to come up at the end, is the silent salesman study, where we observed people with their cigarette packs and found a lot more concealing of packs, especially where children are present.
Thanks. We were just going to have questions from here, but we see people standing the microphones. So what I'm going to suggest is this, and if you don't think it's a good idea, blame Doug, it was his idea. What I'm going to suggest is that we just take questions from the 5 people who are currently standing there, but please, no more than 30 seconds each. We'll take you all, and then we'll ask the panel to respond to those questions one by one. So.
15 seconds. Thank you very much, Abdullah Al-Bidah from Saudi Arabia. It's a suggestion for the scientist and researcher. When Andrew Black from UK showed the bucket, it's very attractive from inside. Outside, not attractive. So inside, the cigarette very clean, white. So there is a suggestion for doing something about the white cover of the cigarette itself, the yellow cover of the filter. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Yeah, if you could just introduce yourselves as you speak. Thanks.
Yes. Good morning, colleagues. My name is Patricio Marquez. I am from the World Bank. A question for our colleagues from Australia. Since you have been able to accumulate some good experience in the litigation front, what are the key lessons that you could transmit to other countries that are contemplating following your example? Thanks.
My name is Florence Bertoletti. I'm the director of the Smoke-Free Partnership. First, thank you to all of you for being such wonderful champions. My question is about proportionality. Andrew, you talked about it. All of the countries that have introduced plain packaging have first introduced point of sales display ban. It happens that we won all of the litigations against point of sales display ban, particularly the one which was fought between Philip Morris and Norway. And my question to you all is, perhaps we should also advise countries to go first with point of sales display ban before plain packaging, or going together, because that will be, I think, very helpful. What do you think about it?
Thanks.
Let's go ahead with all the questions.
Yeah. Please.
Mike Engelgau from the National Institutes of Health. Thanks for all the presentations. I had 2 quick questions. The first has to do with labeling other tobacco-containing products from the last speaker, if other countries are looking at that. And the second is, I'd be very curious how the research agenda was developed in terms of the fine work that Australia did. It sounded like it was a list of questions that industry had, which I'm sure was very, very long. And then how did they come up with the actual questions that they addressed in their research?
Okay, last question.
And the last one from over here.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Hario from Indonesia. Indonesia already implement the pictorial health warning regulation, but the challenge is the tobacco industry create creative ways to respond the pictorial health warning regulation. So they make fancy boxes to replace the package. So when buyers buy one pack of cigarettes, they remove the cigarettes and take it into the fancy box. This is just sharing information. Maybe other countries have the same situation implementing the pictorial health warning on plain packaging. But the bottom line is the tobacco industry will respond with the creativity, responding the regulation. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I'm sorry that time's running out on us a bit, but the questions were around the cigarette itself, the nice-looking white clean cigarette, the question from the World Bank about key lessons from litigation, a question about whether we should have point-of-sale bans first or at least alongside, a question about labelling for other tobacco products, how the research agenda was developed, and whether you get other packages and boxes replacing or going over the plain packaging. So I'm going to ask various speakers to respond to the things that they think they can respond to. Perhaps Mel and Michelle first, because there are a couple of research questions.
Sure. In relation to Annalise's comment, I'd encourage people to go and hear from Dr. Caroline Miller. She's presenting research on the impact of plain packaging on cigars. So that's an important sort of additional piece of research that we couldn't cover here. I would say that in terms of the research questions and so forth that we put together, they were very much focused on the specific objectives of plain packaging, reducing appeal, increasing health warning effectiveness, and correcting inaccurate beliefs about harms, as well as looking at downstream quitting thoughts and intentions and attempts. And we also focused on some of the issues that were concerns that the tobacco industry raised, because we wanted to test those empirically and in a scientific manner. In relation to fancy pack covers, we hardly saw any use of those in Australia. A bit of one or two media stories about it, but really people just can't keep up the pace with continuing to use those sort of things. It's just very inconvenient.
I would just add that we have some examples here of cigars and pipe tobacco in the required plain packaging if people are interested in looking at those after the session, as well as the cigarettes showing each of the health warnings.
Could I respond on the first one about the sticks? My colleague Janet Hook in New Zealand has done some research looking at dissuasive sticks, so changing the colour of the sticks, some qualitative research, and found that similar to plain packaging, it elicited very powerful responses from smokers who particularly didn't like certain colours and described them very negatively. So I think it is another area that we should be exploring, as well as making the pack dissuasive. Why not make the stick itself dissuasive? And there's a variety of ways that you could think about doing that.
And Nathan, I wonder if you could comment on lessons from litigation, which you so enjoyed over the last little while?
It's been a good fight. The key lessons for us really are you've got to be well-funded, well-resourced, you've got to have a continuity of your team involved, you've got to have joined-up government, one voice, all government departments working in unison like a fine Swiss watch, and you've got to get your legal teams talking to each other around the globe. One thing that we did was we got a brief from some key people, we got some briefs from key people on what we're going to be up against, because we'd never faced this challenge as a government and government lawyers. So we brought Matthew Myers out from the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Children out to Australia to talk to our legal teams and to say, this is what you're going to be up against. It helped them certainly buy into the whole fight.
Thanks. Minister?
Thanks very much. Just in relation to proportionality, and that will be the big point of contention in our country. We have a very strong constitution on property rights, but we're absolutely convinced that this is a proportionate response to a really serious public health issue. in relation to the point of sale first. I think different situations in different countries lend themselves in a different way to things, so I don't think it'd be right for me to comment on that. Can I just make one final point really quickly, because I think research is critically important to be able to debunk the spin from the spin masters, and I come back to my earlier point, to have out there on the radio when there's some smooth talking guy talking about, you know, the benefits of tobacco and the jobs they bring and all that stuff, and then have it met by somebody who is clearly research orientated, whose clear mission is that of health, not a politician, but somebody like the Irish Cancer Society or the Institute of Free Tobacco, Tobacco-Free Ireland, that makes a huge difference. That is what sways the population. They're the people that they contribute to by way of charity. They're the people they trust, even if they don't always trust politicians. Thank you.
And Annalise, just a brief comment from you, please.
Yeah, it was just to the question whether plain packaging should sort of be one of the last things you do, I'm not, well, in a way, Norway has done a lot of the other things, so it's a bit difficult to answer. But on the other hand, this is if you want the new generation never to start smoking. Plain packaging is very effective because it's so boring. And what the young ones, they are buying a feeling, an image. They are wanting to show who they are, if they are pink or if they are in the finance or in sports. So that's the main thing. So if this doesn't really appeal to them, then less would really start smoking. And that's one of the main, if we ever are going to get to a smoke-free generation and a smoke-free society, that's, I think it will be effective anyway. Mm.
Thank you very much. Just 2 more minutes, if you'll bear with us. I'm sorry that time's got away from us, but we've had some fabulous presentations. We really have been privileged to hear some outstanding presentations reflecting remarkable progress. So I just want to summarize in 10 points what I think we've learned. First, we've learned about the importance of a sound research and evidence base for the implementation of good public health policy, especially when it's so fiercely opposed. Second, we've learned that evidence-based advocacies from strong NGOs and coalitions has been key to both making the case and providing the continuing support that governments need. Third, strong political leadership's crucial. However effective we may be as advocates, you don't get legislation without legislators. And Minister Riley has shown, as Minister Roxon did in Australia, that a determined personality plus minister who understands prevention is vital to success in tobacco control. And we've also seen the importance of bipartisan support. So governments may change, but as we've heard from Nathan, support for the policy remains adamant. Fourth, bureaucrats also deserve their time in the sun. And no praise can be too high for the commitment and sheer professionalism in this enormously complex area around all the countries where it's happened and happening from our colleagues in health and other government departments. Fifth, the presentations by Melanie Wakefield and Michelle Scolo, supported by a wonderful team, show how fortunate we are to have superb scientists whose meticulous research and evaluation has underpinned this measure and indeed others. And if you want to learn more about that, there is a symposium tomorrow morning from 9 to 10:30 in Conference Hall AB. And for those lucky ones who race to the front, there's also a free copy of the edition of Tobacco Control. Sixth, we all benefit from strong international support and cooperation, including the leadership provided by WHO through Dr. Chan, Doug Betcher, and their colleagues in Geneva and the regions. Seventh, this is of course unlike virtually all other logical life-saving public health measures. It's ferociously opposed by a powerful industry with a 65-year history of lies and deception. And in my 42 years in tobacco, I can't recall the industry opposing any measure so fiercely. So that's, I think, a compliment to both the importance of plain packaging and the people at all levels who've made it possible. We've learned today, yet again, that the industry's scare talk about the dire consequences of plain packaging is as dishonest as their lies about the evidence. But we've also learned, yet again today, that the industry doesn't go away. We have to be ready to deal with all their zombie arguments, the zombie arguments that get killed off in one country and they try to bring to life again elsewhere. Eighth, as so many speakers have stressed here and elsewhere, plain packaging isn't a single magic bullet, and we should not be distracted by those who promote the fallacy of instant outcomes. It is an important and effective part of a comprehensive approach, but as various speakers have said, we do also need the other components. Ninth, by public health standards, we're actually seeing amazingly fast progress. Australia in 2012, now Ireland and the UK. We're seeing other countries well on the way, and by the next conference, I think we can expect to report on an epidemic of plain packaging, real globalization of this important measure. And 10th, this shows perhaps above all how important it is that we stay with our evidence-based advocacy campaigns. Our successes are hard-fought. Overnight success does take time, but the wins do come, and the panelists here have shown us why and how. So they've all made wonderful contributions, not only to this conference, but to tobacco control globally, and I would ask you in joining Doug and myself in thanking them for their presentations here today.
And for those of you who would like free copies of the copies permitting, they're at the front here for the tobacco control plain packaging edition.
So I want to get a selfie.
Great. Well, fantastic. And the epidemic.